Well, good morning, New Harvest. We're happy to have you with us. And whether it's from home or work, we're just happy to have you. My name's Celeste, this is Shelby, and this is Tyler. Would you join us as we worship together? There'll be lyrics on the bottom of the screen. There's a table that you prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. There's a table that you've prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. And I believe you've overcome, and I will lift my song of praise for all you've done. This is how I fight my battles. 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 This is how In the valley, I know they are with me. And surely your goodness and your mercy follow This is how I fight my battles. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. Or you won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will. I choose to praise, to glorify, glorify the name of all names. When nothing can stand against, and I choose to praise, to glorify, glorify the name of all names. When nothing can stand against, oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh yes, I will.
Psalm 34 says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear of it and be glad.
these pieces, broken and scattered, and mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed, but not forsaken. I've been set free. I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Whoa, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. You take our failure, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Oh, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Whoa, I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life.
Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you for being the God who never sleeps, who is always there for me, even when I'm not always there for you. Thank you for your love for us and that you never change. God, we are living during a time that is overwhelming. There's fear, there's anxiety, and there's depression because we can't control what is happening. But help us to rest in you and remember that you are not a God of confusion or of fear, but a God of peace and comfort. Help us to be still and know that you are in control, that you will take care of us even when we are walking through an unknown valley. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, normally, if we were gathered together in the sanctuary, we would be hugging, high-fiving, giving big, giant hugs. But since we can't do that, why don't you take 2 minutes and text maybe 2, 3, maybe 10 people and just wish them a happy morning.
Well, I'm excited to greet you this morning. I'm excited about what we're doing in this place. We're worshiping God. We're focusing on His Word. And I wanted you to hear about some of the things that the Lord's doing in New Harvest folks. I'm really proud of how I'm hearing about people trusting in God, remaining strong, and persevering in just some of the greatest ways. So I'd like to have you take a look at and listen to my friends Sue and Aaron, Kevin, and Debbie. They have a great testimony. I know you'll be encouraged. These are our New Harvest friends.
Hi everyone, my name is Sue Armentrout and I've been a member of New Harvest for the last 14 years, and behind me you'll see that I'm by our food bank, and I've been a part of that for, about 10 years. So I've been asked to say what it is that gets me through this time in our lives. It has been kind of difficult, but I really try to focus on just getting through one day at a time. And the Lord has really blessed me with so much, giving me hope, giving me faith, just making me focus on what's important. I have things to be thankful for. Every day I try to find my joy, and I look for the blessings in each day and try to have a feeling of gratitude for what I have. So thankfully the Lord is with me the entire time. I feel His strength and His love and His peace, and for that I'm very grateful.
Hello, I'm Aaron, and during this season of extra isolation, it presents some extra problems for me because of some difficulties that I have. And I have to keep my mind very busy on very positive things. And so I've chosen to spend extra time reading the Word and spending time with the Lord. And He's using that time a lot during this to help fill my mind with positive things instead of the negative things that want in there all the time anyway.
Hi, my name is Kevin Offield, and when I think about how God has helped me through this time, I have two things that come to mind. The first thing being my perspective. And my perspective has changed, obviously, because my routine has changed. And a lot of those things through this new routine have been really good, and there's been a couple of bad things. But one thing that God is doing is opening up my eyes to how big He is, because now I'm using Him and praying to Him about things that I haven't had in the past. And the second thing is basically I'm trying to focus on the good things instead of the bad things. And with that, I have one word that kind of sums up this time, and it's hope. Not necessarily hope that we won't have the virus or that the virus will go away, but hope that the time that we have here, the relationships being built with our families, the relationship being built with our friends, and the time we have are meaningful to God, and that we can reflect His image during this time. And at the end outcome, we would have a stronger relationship with all of those things and with God too.
Hi, I'm Debbie Stangeland. As a mom, when I want to get my kids' attention, I often put my fingers up here by my eyes and I say, "Look at me. Let me see your eyes." They know I'm very serious and that they need to listen to whatever it is I have to say next. I feel like that's how it is with God right now for me. I feel like He keeps saying to me, "Look here, keep your eyes on me." He and I have been through a lot together, and while He's never come out and said to me, "Okay, listen, this is what I'm going to do next," He has said, "Keep your eyes on me. Wait and see what I'm going to do." And I can tell you without a doubt, every single time, it's been way better than I ever imagined. Listen, I don't know what the world's going to look like in the next 3 weeks, let alone the next 3 years. But I do know God. He is in total control, and He is going to handle it. I am going to keep my eyes on Him because I'm excited and I'm curious, and I want to be fully ready to participate in whatever it is that He has next for me. Don't you?
Well, wasn't it great to hear from many of the people who are a part of our church? I'm sure for many of you it was great to see their faces, and they really answered a question that I would like to spend time looking at in more depth, is what might God be up to in these moments, in these days that we are in right now? They're not just something to get past. What might God be doing right now? I had an experience recently that I'm sure many of you can relate to. I went to the Saturday market with my son. I invited him to come with me. I need to get some vegetable starts. And it was raining, so I figured, well, there's not going to be very many people there. And so it's a great time to go. Little did I know that there was a protest going on at the Capitol, so the Saturday market was full of quite a few people. And so I guessed wrong about that. But we went down to the market and started to look around at some of the different vendors, and eventually found a vendor that I thought would have the stuff that we needed. And so we're trying to be cautious, 6 feet, and try not to get too close to anybody. And this vendor was set up like most of the other ones in that they couldn't allow more than 2 people into their vendor space at a time. And so we had to stand in line when we first got there. They had places marked out every 6 feet for you to stand. Well, right when we get in line, there's this moment where this couple is coming toward us right as we first stand kind of in the middle of the aisle, right where they were wanting to walk. This couple is approaching us, and I kid you not, they had gloves on, they had face masks, they had like the surgical face shields over their faces, and they had hats on, and they were ready for the rainstorm and a nuclear war all at the same time. And my son kind of turned to me and said, "Daddy, is that because of the virus?" And I had to tell him, some people are a little more cautious than others. Some people, dress like they're in a hazmat suit, ready for nuclear war. And they took a wide berth around us, like 10 feet around us, just to make sure that they wouldn't come near my son and I. And so that was kind of like a humorous beginning to our time there. And we stood in line for probably 15 minutes. It felt like forever, standing there in the rain, waiting to be able to get into the tent, to be able to choose the vegetables that I wanted. So we get in, and I tell the employees who are working the different things that I'd like to be able to buy, and they're kind enough to put it into a basket for me. And so we're kind of standing off to the side of the vendor area, and a man just comes out of nowhere and is standing literally 6 inches away from myself and my son. And at first I'm just kind of like, I give this look to the other employees and the people in line like, what is happening? What is going on right now? This is bizarre. And eventually one of the employees says there's a line. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, duh, there's a line, first of all. And second of all, why are you standing so close to me? Give me a little room, buddy. And so I came home fairly frustrated, having seen the hazmat suit people and then the guy who was just oblivious to my presence right next to him, and the fact that I had to stand in line for 15 minutes just to get a few vegetable starts. And I came home and I said to my wife, I am ready for life to get back to normal. And I'm sure that you have had a same sentiment as well in the recent weeks and months. I'm, in fact, quite positive you have said the exact same thing on multiple occasions. I'm just ready for life to get back to normal. This past Wednesday night, during something we called the Quarantine Quandary, we looked at kind of the reality of life about isolation right now, and then at the same time, also this hyperconnectivity, whereas I'm around my kids all day, every day, we never get a break from each other, this hyperconnectivity. And so we talked about the unique ways that we have had to adjust just to be able to function in normal life today, the ways that we've had to manufacture connection to fight off loneliness, the ways that we've tried to maintain a sense of identity apart from our families because we're around them all the time. Sometimes we can get broken down to the point of despair where we just say, I'm just ready for this all to be over. And these are difficult times, no matter what you face in these moments right now. But here's the big and I guess somewhat controversial idea that I would like to look at this morning. And that is this, that God is at work during this pandemic and that we should cherish these times instead of just waiting for them to be over. That we should cherish these times instead of waiting for life to just return to normal. The problem is that some of us are just simply focused on distracting ourselves during these times of isolation and stay-home orders, that we can't truly embrace what is happening right there in front of us. We're missing all the ways that God might be at work because we are simply focused on distracting ourselves. Or we're focused on protesting and making sure that things can get back to normal on our own timeline. Or we're thinking about conspiracies to try and figure out what actually is going on instead of the important work of seeking the Lord for what he might want to do in us, in me, in you, and in our community. What could God be doing? Now, I'm not saying that we should overlook the difficulties that we face right now, and there are many. Many of you have legitimate health concerns. Many of you have lost a job. Some of you are on the cusp of losing a business, or a dream that you have had that you've been pursuing is on the cusp of dying. Many of you have had important plans, whether it's graduations or weddings or family trips, that have had to be canceled because of what is happening right now. These are important things, and I am not devaluing them. Yes, we all want life to return to normal. We want some of those things to come back into their prominent place in our lives. But by focusing so much on waiting for something in the future to happen now, we miss out on the possibility that there could be blessings from the Lord for right here and right now. Just as God's grace is this eternal blessing that we receive in fullness when heaven comes and Jesus returns, there's a future orientation to it. God's grace is also at work in this present moment where God's presence invades our lives. If only we would be willing to submit ourselves to Him, to hear from Him, and to seek Him. And so I titled the sermon today, Don't Waste This Pandemic. Don't waste this pandemic. And what I would like to do is I want to help us make sure that these days aren't wasted by looking at 2 opportunities and 2 shifts. 2 opportunities and then 2 shifts that we can make to really be able to make the most of these days. And I'd like to do that, look at 2 different stories. One from history and the early church, and one from a story within God's Word. Back in the first 100 years after Jesus ascended to the Father in heaven, the early church was a very tiny, small, and insignificant group within the Roman Empire. In fact, historians believe that the Christian faith made up about 0.5% of the Roman Empire population, meaning they were very tiny and insignificant. But by the 300s, that changed significantly. In fact, there was an emperor named Constantine who ruled that Christians could no longer be persecuted. He made that illegal, and then he became a Christian himself. And then by the late 300s, another emperor in Rome named Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so you can imagine that this had a dramatic effect on how many people called themselves Christian believers. So what was it that happened between those early years after Jesus ascended to the Father and by the mid-300s when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire? What happened in those years to allow for such a dramatic change in terms of the number of people who called themselves followers of Jesus? Well, there's probably a variety of ways in which God was at work drawing people to Himself. But one of the ways that history tells us that we know that God used in an amazingly powerful way was a pandemic, much like the one that we're facing now, but far deadlier. Back in between the years of AD 249 and AD 262, about 12 to 15 years, there was a worldwide pandemic that took place. And we don't have a ton of details because there just isn't a lot of historical facts based on those dates being so long ago. But we know that it's one of the deadliest pandemics that took place in history. In fact, we don't even really know what the disease was that caused all of the death. But we do know that the city of Rome was losing approximately 5,000 people per day. 5,000 people per day because of the outbreak. And so how did most people in the society at the time react to what was happening? Here's what one historian wrote. They, the people, deserted those who began to be sick and fled from their dearest friends. They shunned any participation or fellowship with death, with all their precautions, it was not easy for them to escape, meaning that so many people were getting infected by this that even by abstaining away from so many people and places that were connected to death and the disease, they weren't necessarily able to escape. In fact, there were reports at this time of families taking bodies of people that were nearly dead or already dead and just dropping them in the street, getting them away from their home, trying to stave off death. It was an attitude at that time of self-preservation. of taking care of myself, not thinking about others. I need to take care of myself. That was the attitude many had. But there was a bishop in the church named Dionysius, who was the bishop of Alexandria, who took on a different approach for the Christians in his area and led the church in a very powerful way. And here's how he said the Christian believers responded to the pandemic at this time. He said, other people would not think this a time for festival, but far from being a time of distress, it is a time of unimaginable joy. Just consider the contrast there. We have the self-preservation of society, and here we have a bishop in the church who is leading Christian believers and saying this is a time of joy. Now, he is not so much saying that the death should be ignored and that nothing terrible is happening. He's not saying that at all. Rather, he's saying that this is an opportunity and that we should rejoice in it, that the circumstances allow for the Christian faith to be that much more prominent in the society. And it was this infectious joy in the midst of overwhelming fear that drew many Romans in the Roman Empire, many people in the Roman Empire, to the Christian faith. Within 100 years of this pandemic, the Christian faith was well known within the Roman Empire. They were no longer just 0.5%. They were a prominent people. So much so that one of the emperors, between Constantine and Theodosius, he advocated for the people of starting charities, just regular charities, because he saw what Christian believers were doing to serve and to reach out to the people and to give them opportunities and resources. He advocated by saying the Christians, they were benevolent to strangers in their care for those who were dying and their pretended holiness of their lives. Like, he saw the character of the Christian believers and he said, our society needs more of that so that these Christians don't just convince everybody to go in their direction. And so why do I share that story? Well, I think that story illustrates two opportunities that we have in this time that the pandemic provides us, just like it provided them thousands of years ago. And the first is that we have this opportunity to share the hope of Jesus. We have an opportunity to share the hope of Jesus. I think of 1 Peter 3:15, which says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope you have. We should be shouting about the hope we have, the foundation that we have in Jesus, how we aren't living in fear, although these are fearful and anxious times, that we have something greater, a greater foundation that allows us to navigate these days. In my conversations with pastors, with our staff here at church, with other friends, I continue to shout this message over and over, that these times are an opportunity that we cannot miss, that we need to share the hope of Jesus, because people are starved, looking for something to provide them hope and assurance for these difficult times. I went to the grocery store right as all this was kind of ramping up, and I remember this kind of quick thought in my mind of, am I taking my own life into my hands by going into the grocery store right now? Do I need gloves and a mask and a face shield like the people I saw at the market? And it was this fleeting thought and an exaggeration, obviously. But I'm sure many of you have had those thoughts. And I know people in our society are having those thoughts and those wonderments, those worries about death, about their life, about what ultimately matters, what is most foundational. And we have this hope of Jesus, this good news that says that we have life and hope for right now in these difficult days and life beyond this life as well. And our world needs to hear about this hope, and they need to hear from you and from me shouting out this message of hope in Jesus. And so that's the first opportunity. The second opportunity is this opportunity to build a patient, enduring faith. When we first become followers of Jesus, we don't have a godly maturity about us. Instead, God uses the painful, difficult work of sanctification to bring out godliness within us, to make us more like Jesus. Trials and difficulties and adversity produce spiritual fruit in our lives, and they allow us to have a patience and an endurance in the faith to persevere in him. Hebrews 10:36 says that it is patient endurance that we should desire. Patient endurance that we should desire. I was on a run just this week on Monday afternoon with my son. We went down to Riverfront Park. He was on a scooter. I was running. And we went in toward Minto, went right along the river. It had just rained, and so there was very few people out there. And it was really a beautiful afternoon run. And I remember we were about halfway. We went about 5 miles. We were about halfway. And I remember thinking in my mind, boy, I feel really good today. The legs are feeling light. I feel good on my feet. I've got a good pace going so far. Like, oh, man, this could be a really great run. And then we turned around to head back toward where we had parked our car to go home. And the run changed quite dramatically because I realized as I was turning around that now the wind was in my face. That whole time I felt great because I had the wind kind of subtly pushing me along. And that's what helped me feel really good. But that second half of the run, on the way back, in the face of the wind, the whole way, that part of the run was a slog. It was difficult. And if my only goal for the run was to feel really good and to set records with my time and my pace, then the run was a failure. And I know that running is not necessarily the most enjoyable thing in the world, but I also run not just to be able to do things and feel good, but I run to build an endurance so that the next run I have a little bit more strength and a little bit more endurance, and so that I can run a little bit faster or a little bit longer. I run to build endurance. God brings in the same way stiff, strong headwinds right into our lives that kind of often knock us back. He allows us to run the hills of life, the difficult hills of life. Why? To build endurance. To build endurance. He aims to make us more and more like Jesus, and that takes work and trial and tribulation and adversity to build up in us the strength so that we can be patient and endure in the faith. We can be strengthened, but it only comes through hardship and adversity. And so that's the story of history, of how the early church responded to a pandemic and the opportunity it might provide us as well to share the hope of Jesus and to build up our faith. Now what I'd like to do is look at a story in the Bible that I think also illustrates adversity and hardship and shows us two shifts or two adjustments that we could make in our lives to more ready ourselves to embrace the opportunities in front of us. And to do this, I'd like to look at the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is really a story about following God developing a people for himself through a family. And so it starts off with Abram and Abraham, and eventually we come to Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons, and his youngest son is named Joseph, and Joseph is his favorite son. And it's very obvious in the story that Joseph is his favorite son. And I never recommend that as a parenting advice. Jacob was not a very good dad early on in his life. And so Joseph didn't have a very good relationship with his other brothers. There was this instance where his dad, Jacob, gave him this beautiful robe, and he wore it out in front of his brothers and kind of flaunted what his dad had given him. And then later on, he told his brothers about this dream that he had had, that all of his brothers would bow down before him. And so Jacob, loving Joseph the most, kind of turned Joseph into this arrogant kid that none of his brothers really liked. So eventually they schemed against him and faked his murder and sold him into slavery. Not a great circumstance. Jacob was devastated, believing that his favorite son had been killed. Well, the story continues on, and God was still at work in Joseph's life, and he was sold into slavery in Egypt and began serving in the house of Potiphar, who is the captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Well, things didn't work out very well there either. He was accused of assault by Potiphar's wife and thrown into the king's jail, where he spent a number of years. And then eventually he's met in jail by two of Pharaoh's workers, the cupbearer and the baker, are thrown into jail with him. And it says in Genesis 39 that God was still with him. Well, part of the ways that God was still with him is that these two men both had a dream. And they wake up in the morning and they tell Joseph they had a dream, but they can't figure out what it means. And so they're talking to Joseph about it. And he says, I can interpret it for you. And so he interprets the dream for them, which comes true. But Joseph just has one request. He says, remember me, but when you've been reinstated. So the cupbearer is reinstated, but he doesn't remember Joseph. Doesn't remember him. And so for 2 more years, Joseph spent time in jail. Now, I just want you to think about that for a second. Genesis 39 says that the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Genesis 40 says that Joseph did something great and it didn't work out for him. He spent 2 more years in jail. Sometimes the success that God gives us is not easy for us to see happening right in front of us. Sometimes it takes a patient endurance for it to come to pass. So the story continues 2 years later. After Joseph has spent all this time in jail, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has a dream, and he has his other people that work for him, the magicians that work for him, try and interpret the dream, and none of them can. And that's when the cupbearer remembers, oh, there's this guy I spent time with in jail, and he interpreted my dream, and it came true. And so Pharaoh approaches Joseph, and Joseph is able to interpret the dream about years of plenty and years of famine that are on their way. And so Joseph is released from jail. He's put into a position of prominence. Everything that he has interpreted in the dream comes true. And Joseph continues to rise in the ranks in Egypt, where he's the second in command, the second most powerful person in the most important country in the world. That's Joseph. From jail to one of the most powerful men in the world. Well, the story then continues on, and his family re-enters the picture. Joseph has come into this place of prominence where Egypt is seen as this really important world power that's providing food for other places around the world that are in this time of famine because they didn't prepare for it. Jacob, Joseph's father, sends all of his brothers to Egypt to collect grain, and what he says is so that we don't starve, so that they don't starve. Joseph eventually doesn't tell them who he is, but he recognizes his brothers, sends food back. They come back a second time, and this time when he sends them back, he comes up with this little scheme that will make them look very guilty. He puts a silver jar, a silver cup in one of the bags of the grain, and they realize that they've been caught stealing, the brothers. And so they come to Joseph, and Joseph's dream that he has of his brothers throwing themselves down before him comes true. And this is the interaction that they have written about in Genesis 45. Joseph said to his brothers as he's telling them about who he is, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. After this conversation, Joseph asked for his dad, Jacob, to come to Egypt to be with all of the brothers so that they all can be together. And there's a time of reconciliation. Joseph is eventually blessed by his dad, Jacob, as Jacob blesses all of his 12 sons. And then eventually Jacob passes away. And there's this new tension in the family as the brothers quietly wonder, well, was Joseph just nice to us all along because he wanted to impress his dad, to receive the favor that he had from his younger years? With dad now gone, what happens next? And so they're terrified and worried. And Joseph recognized this. And in Genesis 50, right at the end of Genesis, it says this, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, kind of making this up is the sense we get, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. He said to his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him again, just like the dream. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to him, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And before we get to the two shifts that I think this story really illustrates, it's remarkable to me the amount of change that has taken place in the life of Joseph. He's this arrogant boy when we first meet him, wearing a technicolor robe. And here later on in life, he has chosen not to retaliate to the brothers that threw him into slavery and tried to kill him. He's chosen not to do that. Instead, he's given them love and care and acknowledged the struggle that they have in these moments and tried to reassure them of the goodness that God had accomplished through something really difficult. Joseph has been changed by the difficulties he's faced. So what are the two shifts that I think that this story really shows us that if we could embrace, we would then be more able to embrace the opportunity in front of us in this pandemic? The first is the blessing of adversity. The blessing of adversity. Joseph said at the very end, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." The blessing that God brought to and through Joseph came only through immense hardship. A.W. Tozer says, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." The Joseph at the end of the book of Genesis is a much different man, right? Just as I was saying. He has been changed by the hardship that he's faced. All of the blessings that Joseph received were directly connected to the adversity that he went through throughout his adult years. And so it is with us. The resurrection of Jesus comes only through the cross. The glory of heaven comes only through the suffering of earth. One of the things that I often reflect on with my small group of men that I have met with for the last few years is the incredible amount of prayer requests that we have brought to the Lord in difficulties and in hardship over the many years that we've met, and how nearly all of them have been answered. Not in the way that we necessarily would have imagined, not in the timing that we would have preferred, but so many of those prayers have been answered. And I love to remind ourselves of that, of the prayers in your life and in my life that God has answered. Not maybe in the way that we envision, but he met that need as only he can. And as I reflect on that, it empowers me for the moments and the difficulties that I face right now. That God is still here, that God is still involved, and he might not be working on the timeline that I would prefer, but he's still at work. Hardship is not a sign of God's absence. Hardship is a sign of God's active presence. Sandra McCracken says in one of her songs that if it's not okay, then it's not the end. If we're going through hardship and struggle, God is still at work and there is blessing coming through that. Continue on, endure, stay strong because the blessing is coming. As you and I, like Joseph, lean into the Lord during these difficult days, we prepare ourselves to receive the blessing that God has been building up and desires to give us. But many of us are approaching these days by just simply distracting ourselves, trying to get through it as quickly as possible. And the problem is that in there, we miss out on what God is doing. The story of Joseph teaches us that that when we allow God into the difficulties that we face, the blessing arrives in only the way that God can give. So that's the first shift, to embrace the blessing of adversity. The second shift is to recognize your limited understanding. Your limited understanding. One thing I've noticed recently happening on social media and in conversations is that many people are trying to figure out what is actually going on right now. There's a conspiracy, a worldwide conspiracy, a pandemic of some sort. And I've noticed that people have lots of opinions and thoughts about trying to figure out what's actually happening. And I don't so much disagree that, it's important to try and study and figure out how best to navigate these days. I don't disagree with that. But I think often we get distracted by these other things instead of focusing and recognizing that we just simply don't know. What's going to happen this week, next week, years from now? We don't know. What will the economy look like? We don't know. Who is it that knows exactly how to navigate these days? Nobody. Nobody knows how to navigate this. John Piper says that God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of 3 of them. There are so many more things that we don't know than things that we do know. And what we do is we tend to focus on the things that we don't know and try and figure them all out instead of embracing and trusting in the things that we do know and that are secure. This reminds me just of our limited perspective. We have a capacity issue. We can't see all that God is doing. And even bigger than that, we have an issue of not even being able to fathom everything that God might be doing, much less see it. The first step in Christian humility is to recognize God for who he is, his greatness, his majesty. From there, we can take an honest look at ourselves and realize that we are not the same as him, that we fall short of his greatness. And then from there, we can rely on his character, his promises, his goodness in our lives. Limited understanding is a blessing for us. It's not a curse. The one who knows everything promises your good. The story of God's word and the story of God at work in history tell the same overarching lesson, that God uses difficulties to bring blessing. This is not a time to get past as quickly as possible. This is an opportunity for us to share the hope of Jesus and to build up and strengthen our faith. And we do that by embracing the difficulties that we face, knowing that we don't have all the answers, but we worship a God who does. I have sensed God trying to birth those 2 opportunities by shifting my perspective in those 2 ways in the past 2 months. And I have to be quite honest, there's been an immense unwillingness for me to do this. I want to figure it all out. I want to have all the answers to everything that's happening around us. And what God has called me to over and over again is just simply to sit in his presence and allow him to be at work and to trust that he is good. And so my prayer for us as a body, as a church community, gathered all over the place via online this morning, I pray that we will be this kind of people who lean into the Lord during these times, knowing that he is at work. As we end this portion of our time here together, those of you who have been a part of our church know that I often like to read prayers from a Puritan prayer book called The Valley of Vision. And so I'd like to end this sermon and look at teaching from God's word by just this prayer from the Valley of Vision, to allow it to speak to us about God's goodness and give ourselves fully to the work of the Lord that is happening right now. The words will be on the screen as I read it. May I take in what is given from your heart to me in the manger of your birth, in the garden of your agony, in the cross of your suffering, in the tomb of your resurrection, in the heaven of your intercession. Bold in this thought, I defy my adversary, tread down his temptations, resist his schemings, renounce the world with boldness for truth. Deepen in me a sense of my relationship to you as spiritual bridegroom, as sinner's friend. I think of your glory in my vileness, your majesty in my meanness, your beauty in my deformity, your purity in my filth, your righteousness in my iniquity. You have loved me everlastingly, unchangeably. May I love you as I am loved. You have given yourself for me. May I give myself to you. You have died for me. May I live for you. In every moment of my time, in every movement of my mind, in every pulse of my heart, may I never dally with this world and its allurements, but walk by your side, listen to your voice, be clothed with your graces and adorned with your righteousness. Amen. The worship team's going to lead us in a response song that really focuses in on the same ideas as this prayer, focusing our lives on the Lord.
I've tasted the world, seen more than enough. Its promise is fleeting. Of water and wine, I've emptied the cup and found myself wanting. But there is a well that never runs dry. The water of life, the blood of the vine, and all I know is everything I have means nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything I need right now, all I need is you right now. Just one thing I ask, and this I will seek, if only to know you, to be where you are and go where you lead. My God, I will follow. The things of this world are counted as loss. I lay it all down to take up this cross, and all I know is everything I have means nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything I need right now, and all I want is everything you are and nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything to me right now. And I sing, oh, I want nothing but to know you and to be with you, my God. And I sing, and with everything within me, I will worship you, my God. And all I know is everything I have means nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything I need right now, and all I want is everything you are and nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything to me right now. And I sing, I want nothing but to know you and to be with you, my God. And I sing, and with everything within me, I will worship you, my God.
Well, that was really the message for this morning, to give everything we have for Jesus. In the midst of the hardest times, to focus our lives around Him, knowing that He wants to provide blessing and goodness to us as we seek after Him. That's my prayer for us as a church community today. one of the things that we want to let you know about is that we have a community resource closet available. And thank you to all of you who have provided for all the things that we have available there for people to come. But we want to let you know that we could really use some help getting the word out about it. So if you would let other people know that our church has on Thursday from 11 to 1 diapers and wipes and some food and school supplies and all sorts of stuff that we have available here thanks to all of you. And so we've been trying to let people know as much as we can, but we'd really like to be able to serve more people because we have a lot of stuff here. So thanks for bringing so many things, and be sure to let more people know about that throughout this week. Thursday, and then also, if people can't come Thursday from 11 to 1, they can contact us, and we will figure out a way to get them the things that they need. God bless you. We thank you for being a part of everything that we're doing here this morning, and we look forward to being together physically again soon. But until then, we'll see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. God bless you.